Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us at the special COVID-19 and the impact on your superannuation webinar today. I'm your host Amy. Before we begin, I just want to go through some housekeeping with you. You will be put on mute during the presentation to reduce any background noise and disruptions. Should you wish to ask a question, please type the question in the chat box. I'll save them and ask at the end of the presentation. I'd like to now introduce you to our presenter today, Laura Fleischer, the Member Services Consultant from CBUS. Laura has been working in the superannuation industry for over a decade and is dedicated to helping members understand superannuation so they can get the most of it. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Amy, and hi to everyone on the call. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I hope you're all doing well in your own bubble and comfortable wherever you are listening. Yeah, just wanted to come on today and just update you really, because we've had a lot of people freaking out and a lot of questions through our call centres and kind of an overwhelm with people, you know, with everything at the moment, wanting information. So just thought we'd be a bit proactive and let you know what is going on with your superannuation. So just a bit of a general advice warning up front. So everything we talk about today is general in nature. And if you do need anything, put some personal advice, I can help direct you in the right direction for that as well. So as we all know, COVID-19 has disrupted our lives heavily in every sense, really. I don't think there's one person that hasn't been affected and their lives look a little bit different. And the same goes for the share market, and we've seen a lot of turbulence in this time. So, you know, sometimes you see a really negative day and then the next day it bounces back. So it has been a very unsettling time for some people, and we've seen on a fund front, we've seen a lot of people calling up and wanting to switch their investments because they're really nervous about what's going on with the market. What we do know is that restrictions and you know, life in COVID-19 will end at some point and the economy will bounce back. That's what we've seen in the past. Every single time something not like this, but other things happen, yes, the market do take a dip, but in the long run, they do pick up again. To give you an example of this, I'll just show you a quick graph if that dates back to January 08. So those that can remember January 08 and 09 know that we suffered the financial crisis, and at that point a lot of people, what they did was take their money out of their growth asset and either switch it to cash or switch it to conservative. And the reason I put this graph up today is I wanted to show you what the difference was if you stayed where you were versus if you switched. So if you stayed where you were and you had $100,000 invested as of January 09, and all the assumptions are there, you're not adding anything in, it's not taking into consideration insurance and fees and everything, we're just looking purely on the investment side of things. If you had $100,000 in January 09, as of January 2020, you would have $267,000. So versus if you had actually at that time switched to conservative, you would have $196,000. Versus if you switch to cash, you'd have 130. So you can see that although, and you can see here, the market had dipped and gone up and down, it does on a whole over time go on an upwards position and hold, as we say, it's time in the market, not time in the market. That if you stayed put in that growth asset, you would actually be better off. And again, this is just showing a general example. Obviously, people have different personal circumstances. Like, for example, if at that time you were retiring, you might want to take a bit of a different approach versus if you're 25 and at the start of your career you want to be in it for that long term. So this is showing the general example, and again we've got to take into consideration your personal situation when you're making decisions for yourself. So as we know, and if we're watching the news, there's a lot of support out there for us during this time. For example, there's the JobKeeper payments, the support for apprentices and trainees, there's access to government support, and you might have heard about the early access to your super, where you can take out $10,000 out of your super fund, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. If you were considering applying to take money out, I would say before you did that, ask a few questions. First of all, who can you talk to? So obviously you're being very proactive and you're on the call today, which is great. And I'm happy to chat to anyone that wants to after the call. I'm happy for my email to be distributed and set up one-on-one chats. Or if you want to talk to someone in our advice team, we have those guys available all the time as well. So that's the first thing you have to look at. The second thing is, will you have enough for your insurance? One thing that I'm worried about is if people take money out of their super and their balances drop below $6,000, depending on their situation, they may be at risk of losing their insurance. So if you are in that situation, again, chat to me and let's have a look at it, and if anyone's been to any CBUS seminars that I've run in the past, they would know that I'm always harping on about insurance, because really it's the most important thing. At the end of the day, the most important thing we can do is protect ourselves and our families, and I think there's no greater time that this is shown other than now. So of course we want to grow your funds, but also you want to make sure that you're protected. And we have a whole lot of information on that as well. So if that's something you're interested in, we can cover that off on a later session. Another thing is, will you be locking in the recent investment losses? So similar to the graph that I showed just before, as the market has dipped, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, if you were to sell now, you're actually locking in those losses that have happened in the last few months. So it may or may not be the ideal time to take money outside of super. The next point is, how much will it affect you in retirement? And the answer is yes. It will depend on a few factors by how much, and again we'll go through that. And the last point is, if you took money out and you had a low balance, could it be transferred to the ATO? We may actually have to transfer your funds to the ATO, and that means that your super is just sitting there in an account and it's not actually working for you. So again, if you're in that situation, come and have a chat. So if you were to take the $20,000 out of your super today, so I should mention that as part of the early release scheme that the government's put out, you can take up to $20,000 out of your super. So you can take $10,000 this financial year and $10,000 next financial year. If you were to take that money out, obviously there are going to be problems for you later down the track with it reducing your balance when you go to retire. And for any Barefoot Investor fans, I know that he's Scott Pape, he's really popular. He's written a few books that most people, you see a lot of, you might hear your friends talk about their buckets and whatnot. He's written a few good articles of that if you want to go see. But yeah, depending on how old you are, will make a difference to how much it will affect you in your retirement. For example, the younger you are, the more it will affect you, as you can see from these figures here. So I just want to make sure everyone can hear me, because it's coming up with that I'm experiencing network connections. Do I sound all right, Amy?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, wonderful. So if you really do need your money now, how can you access your super? So unfortunately, you can't come to me and say, I need the money. You have to go through the ATO, and I'll give you the details on the next slide. But are you eligible to access your money? So you are eligible to access money out of your super if you are either unemployed or you are receiving a job seeker payment, so youth allowance payment, parenting payment. And as of this year, you have either been made redundant or your working hours have been reduced by 20%. And for the sole traders on the call as well, the same goes. So it's that 20%. So if your turnover has reduced by 20%, you are eligible to take money outside of your super. And again, that's what I was saying, that to go through, to apply, you go through and do it on the MyGov website. So if you just log on, there's links through there. To give an example of if you are able to apply for it. So Rachel has a plumbing business, so she had an electrician business, and usually she gets around $10,000 a month in turnover. However, at the moment, she's getting around that $5,000 a month in turnover. So as we can see, she has had a decrease in her turnover by more than 20%, and therefore she is eligible for that early release. Beautiful. And as I mentioned on a previous slide, we are here to support you. So if you do need any more information, the best place to go is our website, which I've got on the slide here, but just type in CBUS into Google, and we've got updated information coming through all the time on how COVID-19 is affecting your super. There's also a lot of frequently asked questions, and the same goes for the employers on the call as well. All the frequently asked questions that we're getting through to the call center, we're putting up on the website. So it's really good. And if there are long waits on the call center, just to get onto the website. There's also the member app, and as I mentioned, the advice line. So we're really lucky at CBUS. I think we've got a really good offering that we actually have an advice team that is no cost to you. So if you want some personal advice limited to your super, you can actually call up and access that for free, which is a really, really great service. I think we're one of the only super funds that offers that as a no cost. And really, I advise anyone to take advantage, because I mean, it doesn't hurt, and they can really look at your situation and answer your questions. And the same for anyone that's out on site. We actually have a team at CBUS called the coordinators, and they're still out on site talking to people. So if that is something that you need, we can organise that as well. Beautiful. So that ends the formalities of the presentation. I think we have a few questions, so we can go through there and make it a bit more informal.
Thanks, Laura. I found the content very useful, and I hope that our listeners all did as well. If you have any questions or comments, please type them in the chat box now. I can see we do have a couple of questions that have come through while you were presenting, Laura, so I'll just get started on those. Looks like the first one we've got here is, how much of my portfolio is invested in shares?
Oh, that's a really good question. So it depends on how you are invested. For most people, if you haven't opted a investment mix, you haven't gone in and physically changed it, you would be currently invested in what's called a growth option. And in that growth option, you've got about 70 to 75% of your portfolio would be in what we call growth assets. So that would be shares, infrastructure, property. And that's the part that, as we see the changes in the economy, that's getting affected, going up and going down. And overall, your funds would be invested about 50% in shares, and that's about half in Australian shares and half in international shares. And about 26% in property and infrastructure. And then the other parts just kind of make up for different alternative assets as well. If you're invested that's for most people. I think it's about 98% of our people in our fund are invested like that. But if you have opted to change it, so if you've invested in more of a high growth, you'll have a higher percentage invested in those growth assets and the shares. And if you're in a conservative, you'd have less invested in those options. But you can also log on to your account and see how it's invested there.
Thanks, Laura. Another question here. What is the typical investment return?
That's a really good question as well. So we've been really fortunate with our economy in recent time, and I think this whole thing has shown that, because we're experiencing negative returns for the first time in a long time, really, which is not to be unexpected. So when we look at the share market, we expect that we're going to have negative years probably once every 7 years. But we've been really lucky and haven't had a real downturn since, as we saw in that graph before, since the global financial crisis. So over the long term, especially with your CBUS funds, they've performed really well. And on average, we've had about, so since we've started, so 32 years ago, our average return is about 9 to 9.5%, and the same goes over the last 10 years, up to last financial year, about that kind of 9.5%. So that's really strong. If you think about it, how much your money is working for you. For example, if you have 100 grand in super, your money just from sitting there is earning about $9,000 a year. Like it's a lot of money, and we've had it really good for a long time. Obviously, with the situation at the moment, we're probably going to expect a negative this financial year. However, it's not as bad as we first predicted. So I looked this morning, and our growth assets is about negative 3.8. So that would be, again, if you had your account balance, say the end of last financial year was $100,000, it would have gone down by about 3,800, so about that 4,000, which obviously it's a lot of money to lose. But if we look at how good we've had it for so long, hopefully going forward, it doesn't take that long to actually recoup those losses and your money go back up again. But again, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but that's what has happened in the past, and that's what we hope will happen again.
Thanks, Laura. Another question here. I'm currently in conservative low risk mode. When should I change to growth high risk mode?
This is a really good question. So it would depend, and this is where it would probably be worth talking to either myself or the advice line, because it would depend on your situation. So when someone's asking if they're in conservative mode, I'd ask them why. So if, for example, they're getting closer to retirement and that's why, it might be a good idea just to stay in there and not take that risk. Whereas if you've switched because of this and you're waiting to see what happens, it's a hard one to know when to switch. But when you look back at that graph that I showed at the start of the presentation, as we can see, it does go back up, and over time, usually the market kicks off. And what you don't want to do is miss out on that swing up, and because in the long run you'll lose money. Really, at the moment, shares are, if you think about it, at a discounted price, and then they're going to become more expensive. So if that is something that you're trying to do, time the market, it might be a time to look at switching. But again, I definitely say have a chat to either myself or the advice team and see what works best for your personal circumstances.
Perfect, thanks for that one. Another question here. I have multiple super accounts. Is now a good time to consolidate them into one?
It's always a good time to consolidate. However, because it is a funny time with the share market going up and down, it may not be the best time to consolidate, because, for example, if you happen to roll over your funds on a day where the share market has dipped by 1%, you will have those losses because it will take a day for it to be transferred across. However, in saying that, if it's gone up at %, you'll have those gains. So it's a little bit more up and down to transfer at the moment. But again, it's not. It's something that it's always a good thing to do. What I would say to anyone too with consolidating your super is check your investments first. So no matter when it is, check your insurances. Because what I hate seeing is people, so when you have multiple super accounts, you will have insurances attached to them. So say I have an Australian super account, I've got $200,000 worth of insurance in there, so death cover. And then I've got my AMP and I've got $200,000 worth of death cover in there. And then I've got my CBUS, I have $200,000 worth of death cover in there. If you consolidate them just blindly, you will, and say put them in the CBUS, you will lose that amount of cover. However, if you want to keep those amount of cover, what you can do is fill in an insurance transfer form, and we will actually take the responsibility of that cover that you already have. And why it's good to do this, and why I always tell people to look at your insurances before you consolidate, is you may put it all in there and go, okay, I've just do it blindly and I'll sort it out later. And then you may want to come and get more cover, and for some reason you might not be able to get that if you've had any kind of medical condition happen to that you may have difficulties. You might be fine, most people are fine, but I've seen it too many times where then people have medical conditions and it's hard for them to get insurance, and it's really upsetting, because I'm like, if you just filled in a form beforehand, you would be protected. So if that is something that you're interested in as well, reach out to me and tell your friends, your family, your kids, whoever, to do the same, to make sure that you check that insurance cover.
Thanks for that, Laura. Another question here. Does CBUS offer services to its members to help them diversify their portfolio, or am I better to speak to a financial advisor about this?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's definitely something that we offer. So as I mentioned before, the advice line, they're probably the best place to go to, and they can help run through your personal situation and see how it's best that you are invested, and have a look at it from that point of view. If you do have an advisor already, it's always good to have a chat to them as well. But like I mentioned, it's a free service, the CBUS advice, and it, like, without being biased, because I've worked in a lot of different institutions, it's a really good service. So I would say to take that up as a first point of call, because when you go to an advisor, you may be paying, like I used to be an advisor in a former life, and to give someone advice on how to be invested, you're charging anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000 to give them that advice, whereas it's something that we can offer for free. So if you don't have any crazy complex situations, it's definitely something to take advantage of.
Okay, another question here. What are the implications of withdrawing super early on my insurance cover?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm guessing that's around taking it out under the early release. And yeah, as we covered, as long as you've got the $6,000 still in there, everyone should, your cover will stay intact. And if it goes under that $6,000, there's a few things that might affect it. If you're under 25, or if you're not making contributions, where we might have to cancel that insurance. But what you can do if you're worried about your insurances being cancelled is actually log on to your your member online and nominate to have your insurances stay if you do go under that $6,000 as well. So that's always an option. And for anyone that's, if you get on the site, that's always a good thing to do.
Perfect. Looks like that's all the questions we have for today. I just want to thank you again, Laura, for taking the time to speak to our members today. Thank you to all of those that took the time to join us. The recordings will be available if you want to rewatch and share them with your team. The next webinar will take place next Tuesday, where Stephanie Dan will talk to you about monitoring your mental well-being and wellness during these challenging times. Plus on Thursday, we have another Q&A with NECA Victoria's Executive Director, Pavel Podolsky, Workplace Relations, Natalie Mill, and business expert, John Mailer from ProTrade. Please register, even if you can't attend, as we will share the recording with you. Most details can be found on our website. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Laura.